Welcome to Crime Era Channel, where every crime tells a story. The darkest secrets of crime are uncovered, and the hidden truths of criminal underworlds come to light. It began in the flat silence of rural Ohio. Fields stretched endlessly toward a gray horizon, and in that quiet, one man claimed he could hear the voice of God whisper through the corn. His name was Jeffrey Lundgren, a husband, a father, and a former lay minister in the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. To his neighbors, he was quiet. To his followers, he was chosen. And to history, he would become something far darker. Jeffrey's faith ran deep, but so did his resentment. He saw hypocrisy in the church, pride in its leaders, and weakness in anyone who dared to doubt him. He told friends that God was revealing new truths to him, that he alone understood the secret code hidden within the Old Testament's temple blueprints. It sounded eccentric, but charisma can polish madness until it gleams like a revelation. Soon, a handful of people began to listen. In the early 1980s, Lundgren and his wife, Alice, moved to the small town of Kirtland, Ohio, a place sacred in early Latter-day Saint history. He started hosting Bible study sessions in his living room, guiding neighbors through scripture with fiery conviction. In the soft glow of lamplight, faces turned toward him in awe. Each verse, he claimed, held a hidden meaning. Each passage foretold the world's renewal. The faithful leaned closer, convinced they were witnessing prophecy reborn. Every cult begins with a promise. For Lundgren, the promise was purification, a return to divine order. He claimed the established church had strayed, and that only his followers could restore God's plan. He preached obedience as the highest virtue, and disobedience as a rebellion against heaven itself. It was an intoxicating message. The ordinary suddenly felt chosen. The uncertain suddenly felt secure. As his influence grew, Lundgren's teachings grew bolder. He rented an old farmhouse on Chardon Road, just outside Kirtland, where his followers began living communally. The rules were simple and absolute. All money was turned over to Jeffrey, prayers were recited daily, and all outsiders were to be distrusted. To the faithful, it was a family. To outsiders, it looked like isolation. And isolation, as it always does, tightens the leash of control. By 1988, Lundgren's sermons had taken a dark, apocalyptic turn. He warned that God would soon cleanse the earth, and only the most obedient would survive the coming storm. Each day blurred the line between devotion and fear. He began dividing his followers into ranks, labeling some as celestial and others as fallen. The fear of damnation became the very glue that held them all together. Among the believers were the Averys, Dennis, Cheryl, and their 3 young daughters. They were gentle, devout, and generous, and they saw Lundgren as a true spiritual shepherd. They trusted him completely. But Jeffrey saw something else in them, a flicker of doubt in their eyes, questions behind their smiles. In his twisted mind, doubt was sin, and sin demanded a sacrifice. Control breeds paranoia. Lundgren began to suspect plots among his own flock. He wiretapped rooms, spied on conversations, and constantly tested his followers' loyalty. Every whispered word of dissent became proof of betrayal. He started speaking of cleansing his group before God's return, and soon, the line between metaphor and command simply disappeared. Through the cold winter of 1988, he crafted what he called the revelation. He told his followers that God had chosen one family for removal, that their blood was needed to atone for the sins of the group. No one dared to challenge him. When obedience becomes the only path to salvation, silence becomes the only means of survival. Rain fell softly over Kirtland on the night of April 17, 1989. Inside the barn on Chardon Road, the followers gathered, believing they were preparing for a divine test. The Avery family arrived, completely unaware of the fate that awaited them. In the flickering light of lanterns, a journey of faith descended into a nightmare of horror. By dawn, 5 lives were gone. The commune buried the truth beneath a layer of prayer and fear, convinced that the act was not only necessary, but holy. Days stretched into weeks. Lundgren's followers carried on with their daily routines, haunted but ever obedient. He assured them that redemption was near, that their sacrifice had secured God's favor. But guilt is a corrosive force. It works quietly. Whispers turn to tremors, and tremors eventually turn to cracks in their wall of silence. Eventually, law enforcement grew suspicious. A missing persons report was filed. There was a pattern of disappearances. The FBI began to watch the farmhouse. Sensing the walls closing in, Lundgren led his remaining flock on a desperate flight across the country, drifting from one motel to the next, preaching to ghosts in empty rooms. In 1990, the long pursuit finally ended in California. Federal agents surrounded a trailer park near San Diego, where the once confident prophet surrendered without a fight. Reporters described him as calm, detached, his eyes distant, as if he were still listening to voices that no one else could hear. The courtroom became a mirror. For America's morbid fascination with fanaticism, prosecutors called him a master manipulator. His defense attorneys called him delusional. The jury saw both, a sharp intelligence that had been completely warped by an absolute belief in his own divinity. The verdict was guilty on all counts. The sentence was death. Alice Lundgren and several other followers faced their own convictions for complicity. Some broke down in tears, consumed by guilt and regret. Others defended their prophet to the very end. Even from behind bars, his influence lingered, proof that charisma doesn't die just because the body is caged. From his cell on death row, Lundgren wrote letters. He spoke of his visions, of being misunderstood, of a divine justice that was still to come. To the end, he saw himself as a prophet, not a predator. Faith had consumed his reason, and in the ashes, only his own twisted certainty remained. Experts studied the case, trying to understand how ordinary families could obey such horrific commands. They found the same pattern that echoes through every destructive cult: isolation, charisma, fear, and absolute authority. The promise of salvation is dangled just above the terror of damnation. And in that constant push and pull, the human conscience collapses. Today, the barn on Chardon Road is gone, replaced by quiet homes and unremarkable lawns. But locals still speak softly when night falls, of the years when a dark belief turned their town cold. Schools teach the story as a cautionary tale, churches as a tragedy, and historians as a repeating pattern of human behavior. Every generation finds its prophets. Some heal, some help, and some, like Jeffrey Lundgren, use faith as a mirror to reflect their own insatiable hunger for dominance. His story isn't just history, it's an anatomy lesson and examination of how the deep human need for meaning can be weaponized. He said he heard God whisper in the rustle of the leaves. Perhaps he did, but perhaps it was only the echo of his own voice, calling itself divine. Faith can light the path forward, or it can blind the traveler. The difference, always, lies in who is holding the lantern. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the shadows of history. Stay curious, and stay safe.